July 25, 1944, Normandy. Dawn had not yet arrived when 320 Canadian soldiers from the legendary Black Watch Regiment took up their starting positions to attack the Verrieres Ridge. This strategically important height south of Caen has become an impregnable fortress held by battle-hardened SS units. What happens in the next few hours will forever go down in history as the most tragic day of the Canadian Armed Forces in World War II. Of the 320 men who went on the attack that morning, fewer than 20 will remain in the ranks by the end of the day. This is a story about courage bordering on madness, about team mistakes that cost hundreds of lives, and about soldiers who continued to march forward even when there was no hope left. Operation Neptune, which began on June 6, 1944, became the largest amphibious operation in human history. The Allied forces successfully broke through the vaunted Atlantic Wall, and with fewer losses than the most optimistic forecasts suggested. It seemed that the way to the depths of France was open, and the collapse of Nazi Germany was a matter of a few weeks. However, the euphoria of the first days was quickly replaced by a gloomy reality. The German command, recovering from the initial shock, managed to organize an effective defense in northern Normandy. Despite the Allies' absolute air supremacy and multiple superiority in equipment and manpower, the advance stalled. The battles in the Normandy hedges, the famous bocage, turned into a bloody meat grinder, resembling the trench battles of the First World War rather than the maneuverable war of the mid-20th century. The casualty figures spoke for themselves. More than 37,000 Americans and over 25,000 British and Canadians died in the battles for Normandy. Every meter of French land was acquired at the cost of dozens of lives. The Allied command found itself in a difficult position. The public expected decisive successes, the political leadership demanded results, and the troops were bogged down in positional battles against an experienced and stubborn enemy. Operation Goodwood and unfulfilled hopes. In this situation, British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, commander of the 21st Army Group, developed an ambitious breakthrough plan. Operation Goodwood was supposed to be the decisive blow that would break the German defenses south of Caen. Montgomery concentrated unprecedented forces. 3 full-fledged tank divisions, with massive artillery and aviation support, were supposed to descend on the German positions. On July 18, 1944, the operation began with an impressive artillery and airstrike. Thousands of tons of bombs and shells rained down on the German positions. It seemed that nothing alive could survive under such fire. The initial success was impressive. The advanced units advanced several kilometers. The Germans retreated. However, the offensive soon faltered. The German command threw its elite units into battle, SS Panzer divisions manned by veterans of the Eastern Front. These battle-hardened units, armed with superior Tigers and Panthers, turned the Allied offensive into a bloodbath. The losses were catastrophic. Hundreds of tanks burned in the fields of Normandy. Thousands of soldiers were left lying on French soil. After the failure of Operation Goodwood, the Allies found themselves in front of the Verrieres line, a powerful defensive line that controlled the approaches to the Caen-Falaise plain. The central element of this line was the Verrieres Ridge, a commanding height from which the Germans could control the entire surrounding area for many kilometers. Canadian General Guy Simonds, commander of the 2nd Canadian Corps, developed a plan to capture this critical position. Operation Spring was supposed to be a revenge for previous failures. The plan was ambitious. A night attack by 2 divisions was supposed to take the Germans by surprise and ensure the capture of the ridge before dawn. For the Canadian units, and especially for the Black Watch Regiment, this operation had a special symbolic significance. Their predecessors became famous during the First World War, especially at the Battle of Verrieres Ridge in 1917, when Canadian units accomplished the impossible by taking an impregnable height. Now, 27 years later, a new generation of Canadian soldiers had to repeat the feat of their fathers. Operation Spring. The operation was originally scheduled for July 23, but heavy rains forced it to be postponed to the 25th. This transfer played a fatal role. The Germans managed to strengthen their positions and pull up reserves. Units of the 272nd Infantry Division of the Wehrmacht and the elite 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler are entrenched on the Verrieres Ridge. The attack plan called for the use of artificial lighting. Searchlights were supposed to shine into the clouds, creating an artificial moon for the attackers. It was an innovative tactic, but it also had a downside. The silhouettes of the attackers became excellent targets for German machine gunners. The Highlanders of northern Nova Scotia were the first to attacking the villages of Tilly-le-Campagna and Saint Martin de Fontenay. Despite fierce resistance, they managed to capture their targets, albeit at the cost of heavy losses. The success of the Highlanders created the illusion that the operation was progressing according to plan. The fateful morning of July 25th. Major Phil Griffin, the commander of the Black Watch, was ordered to build on his success and attack the Verrieres Ridge itself. The problem was that the promised support, tanks, and massive artillery fire never materialized. Communication was disrupted, there was no coordination between the branches of the armed forces, but the headquarters demanded an immediate attack. Griffin found himself in an impossible situation. On the one hand, he understood the suicidal nature of attacking without support. On the other hand, an order is an order, and the honor of the regiment demanded the fulfillment of duty. In the pre-dawn gloom, 320 soldiers of the Black Guard lined up to attack. What followed can only be described as a massacre. As soon as the Canadians left their shelters and began climbing the ridge, they were hit by a hurricane of fire. German MG-42 machine guns, nicknamed Hitler's saws for the distinctive sound, mowed down entire compartments. Mortars and artillery turned the slope into a hell of fire and metal. Despite the catastrophic losses, the Black Guard continued to move forward. Witnesses later said that it was like a death parade. The soldiers marched in an even formation under deadly fire, fell and did not get up again, while those who remained on their feet closed ranks and continued moving. Major Griffin was one of the first to fall, struck by machine gun fire. The captain took command, but he was soon killed. Then a lieutenant, then a senior sergeant. The chain of command was crumbling by the minute, but the attack continued. This was no longer an organized offensive, but a desperate attempt by a handful of brave men to achieve the impossible. Some groups managed to reach the German positions. In hand-to-hand combat, the Canadians fought with the fury of the doomed. But there were too few of them, and too many Germans. The SS counterattacks drove the Canadians back, and every meter of retreat cost new lives. By noon, it was all over. Of the 320 people who launched the attack in the morning, less than 20 remained in the ranks. Losses amounted to 94% of the personnel, an unprecedented figure even for the Second World War. The Black Guard has virtually ceased to exist as a combat unit. July 25, 1944 was the blackest day in the history of the Canadian Armed Forces. Never again has the Canadian Army suffered such terrible losses in a single day of combat. The tragedy of the Black Watch shocked Canadian society and the military command. The investigation revealed a whole chain of command errors. The lack of coordination between the branches of the armed forces, inadequate intelligence, and stubborn adherence to the plan despite the changed situation all led to disaster. The generals, who were sitting in headquarters far from the front line, sent people to certain death, not understanding the real situation on the battlefield. The tragedy of the Black Watch forced the Allied command to reconsider its tactics. Never again were Canadian units sent to attack without adequate support. Coordination between infantry, tanks, and artillery has been greatly improved. Intelligence has become more thorough, and commanders have gained more freedom in making decisions on the spot. The Verrieres Range was eventually captured in the second week of August, when Operation Totalize finally broke the German defenses in Normandy. This time, the Canadians operated with massive tank and artillery support, and the ridge fell with minimal losses. But for those who remembered July 25th, this victory had a bitter taste. It was bought with the blood of 300 soldiers of the Black Guard. The Black Watch Regiment was rebuilt after the war and still exists today as part of the Canadian Armed Forces. New generations of soldiers wear the regiment's insignia with pride and pain, remembering their predecessors who fell on the Verrieres Ridge.